There's a new DF64 grinder coming out, and it's quite interesting and quite different from what we have seen from the brand before. So today we're going to take a close look at it. What's changed, what's different, does it brew good coffee, and of course also how is it different from the OG DF64 as well as the DF83, which was released quite recently. The DF83 was already quite a significant improvement over the original DF64. If you haven't seen my review of that grinder, I'll put a link to it down below and then you can check it out. But basically the conclusion was that in most of these small instances where it really matters, the DF83 just came in and really improved some of these things that needed to be fixed. That's not to say that the DF83 was perfect. It's just that the original DF64 had a lot of problems. For instance, the declumper was something that most users ended up doing something about. And then there was the issue with the grinds cup being too far from the chute, and that would cause a bit of a mess. Then there were also some small aesthetic things that definitely didn't look that great. And in all those small instances, the DF83 came in and corrected the problem. So now we're here with the new DF64V, and V is for variable speed. It has this button here that can adjust the speed, but more about that later. And what we're seeing now is a big departure from the original DF64 design. Actually, in the most important things, they have done it quite differently. So the most obvious thing that you'll notice right away is that we have this magnetic chute here, which is a pretty nice touch. So you can just take it out like this, and then you have access to the declumper. And this time the declumper is made out of some kind of metal steel sheet. It's quite thin, but it gets the job done. So you don't have massive clumps coming out, but still it feels like the burrs are able to spin freely and get rid of all the grounds in the first go. So you don't have this build up of old grounds that get reground. And yeah, so in that sense, it's a huge improvement. Besides that, we are also seeing a quite different design for the catch cup. Before you kind of had to put the catch cup in and then it would kind of vibrate when the grinder was running. And in that sense, this also seems like a better solution. It's a bit weird at first, but you get used to it and it's definitely less noisy. The catch cup itself is not exactly 58 millimeters, so it will kind of fall into the portafilter. But in daily use, it works pretty well, especially if you're also using a funnel with your ESPRESSO workflow. It's kind of a no-frills, simple design. I will say this wooden accent here looks really out of place, but this is kind of something you expect from the DF64 brand. It seems like a brand that only hires engineers and not real designers that can kind of make the product feel more polished and good looking. Going up to the grind chamber, we also have a completely different design here. Now you have this cool anti-popcorning thing that is built in, and this actually works really well. It's easy to slide in the beans and they don't jump out of the grinder. So this is definitely a welcome solution. Then when you go into the burr chamber, you also have a very simple solution that works a lot better than what we saw on the previous DF grinders. So this just makes it very easy to open up the burr chamber and go in and change burrs. And this can be done in something like 10 minutes perhaps, which makes it much more simple than most grinders out there. The DF64V still comes with this kind of bellows system that is there to push out the last grounds, but I find that you actually don't use it and the grinder just looks a lot more wholesome and nice without the bellows. I will just give it a little bit of a knock on top here, and that usually does the job and gives you a rather low retention. So overall, I will say that this revisited design is a pretty significant step up compared to the original line. And as you may notice as well, the grinder is a lot slimmer, it's smaller than it was before, and it's even lighter as well, which is something they've been able to do because of the new brushless motor inside. But let's grind some beans and then we can talk a little bit more about the workflow and how it is in daily use. Now I loaded out 15 grams of beans and we're going to grind them on what would probably be described as a pour-over setting. So this is setting 57, and now I'm just going to start the grinder, and it's running at 600 RPM, which is the lowest speed. And I'm somewhere in between 14.9 and 15. So the scale is not completely sure. Now it's stabilized at 14.9. So this looks like a pretty low retention. Let's just do one more test again. Okay, I got 15 grams again. Let's just try to change the RPM slightly, see if it makes any change. Okay, now we're at 1600. Let's see how fast it goes. Sounds like there's something in there. Let me just stop it. And this is kind of interesting. Now we can actually notice that it seems like there's a lot more static electricity due to the higher speed. So more coffee is stuck around the chute here, and I'm just going to take it off and shake it a little bit. Okay, so let's see the weight. And now we're actually at 15.1. So it's kind of like fluctuating a little bit between 15.1 and 15.2. So it seems like maybe I got a little bit from the previous dose out now due to the more excessive shaking of the chute. But it's quite interesting to see that there was a difference in static electricity. There was also a little bit of a difference in the mess created with the grinder. So at the moment, there's a lot of discussion as to whether RPM actually makes a difference in the grind distribution and the flavor. But from what I can see here, it definitely makes a difference in terms of the messiness that you will have on your kitchen counter. I should of course also say that this little test is made without any RDT, so I haven't sprayed the beans with any kind of water, and that would also mitigate the static. And at the same time, I'm not using the bellows, and that could probably also give me a little bit more of a consistent result from grind to grind. But overall, I will say it's been similar to what I've seen in daily use. The difference is 1.0, 1.2 grams, and that's definitely acceptable for me. If you have read anything about the DF64V online, you've probably seen some people mentioning things like stalling at lower RPMs. And that is also something I have experienced a little bit of with really light roasted beans, especially Ethiopian beans that can be very dense. At 600 and 700 RPMs, I have experienced stalling when doing a cold start. So that means putting in the beans and then starting the motor. It does help if you already start the motor and then you pour in the beans. And it can also help if you pour the beans in slower. However, I will say after I changed the burrs to SSB multi-purpose burrs, which I did after some weeks of testing, I didn't encounter this problem at all. So it's probably related to how aggressive the cuts are in the burrs, and that can kind of overwhelm the motor at lower RPMs. At higher RPMs, such as 1000 to 1400, I haven't experienced any stalling at all. So I will say that it's something to be aware of, but it's not a huge deal breaker. Now let's get to the taste test. I will brew two Hario V60s, and then I'll compare the DF64V to the original DF64 grinder and then we can talk a bit more about the flavor differences. And now is also a good time to introduce this video's sponsor, which is a coffee sponsor. So instead of talking about VPNs or Squarespace and things that YouTubers usually talk about, I think it makes more sense to talk about coffee beans. And these beans have kindly been provided by Coffee Bros, which is a pretty new roaster from US that I've tried a few beans of theirs before. And I've been quite impressed, so I'm super thankful that they wanted to sponsor this video here. And the beans we're going to brew up are these ones from Bolivia. They are from the Cup of Excellence. I think they placed number 8 in the exotic beans category. So it's a natural processed coffee with some really interesting flavor notes. And hopefully those will enable us to do a good taste comparison between the two DF64 grinders. Okay, I am pretty confused right now, so let me just try to taste and then we can see if I can taste any difference. It's a pretty classic natural, I would say, in the sense that it's got slightly rum raisin vibe going on, and then it goes into a bit more like a citric, maybe some tangerine, dark chocolate, orange kind of candy territory. I feel like the balance is pretty on point with this one here, whereas this one here is not quite as balanced. You still do get that kind of raisin, orange taste impression, which is really nice, but the body is a bit more bitter, I would say. Yeah, but for me, this one has more balance. Okay, time for the reveal. Let's see which one is which. Yeah, this one is the V, DF64V, and then I guess this one is the 64, the original version. And I should say that this kind of impression completely backs up what I've been experiencing in my testing leading up to this video, which is that the DF64V is quite a balanced grinder for pour-over coffee, and a lot more so than the original DF64 with the stock burrs. I also did a comparison with the DF64V against the K-Max, and I felt like it also was a little bit more balanced than the K-Max. So that just goes to show that this grinder is quite capable when it comes to drip coffee. And certainly it's the best one I've been experiencing from DF so far. I should also say that if you're interested in ordering this coffee for yourself, I'll put a link down below. And if you buy the coffee from Coffee Bros, then you can also support the channel and get some delicious coffee as well. So I guess that's a win-win. I've already seen some reviewers talk about the espresso that this grinder produces, and in my testing it's also been really excellent. It's just a well-balanced cup that has a bit of everything and doesn't really go into that astringent, bitter territory. So they come with plenty of clarity, not a huge body, but quite delicate burrs. And this is a little bit of a different geometry compared to what we've seen before with the DF grinders. And they have a different kind of coating. I believe it's called diamond-like carbon or something like that, DLC. I'm not sure what it stands for, but I can just talk to what I've been experiencing in the cup. And it's been quite delicate flavors, both for drip coffee and espresso. So I will say that these are some very excellent all-round burrs. If you're going to compare them to SSP, yeah, they are going to have a little bit less clarity. But overall, if you're just drinking coffee like a normal person, then it's not something you're going to notice in daily use. So I think probably many people who get this grinder, they won't even have to upgrade burrs at all, unless they're curious, of course. And if they are, it's really easy and straightforward. When it comes to swapping burrs, there's also another thing that's quite good with the grinder, and that is there's a huge range to dial in. So I've been grinding espresso on setting 18 with a 58mm precision basket. So that's usually quite fine, but I still have plenty of range to go if I want to go finer. And the same with the drip coffee setting. I've been moving around to that setting 55 to 60. So it just shows that this grinder really has a huge range. So you won't really feel like you're struggling. And if you remember my last video where I reviewed the Time War Sculptor, which is also a great grinder, it's a little bit of a problem with that one, that when you change burrs, then you might lose your espresso setting. At least that's what happened to me when I installed the SSP cast burrs. I don't think that will be a worry with this grinder here. So it's also kind of expected from the DF range. That is one of the modding grinders of choice. And you can definitely install new burrs here and have a good experience. As for the RPM, I'm not going to talk more about it than I already have. I believe it's a topic that deserves a video for itself and some extensive testing. However, I will say it's a feature I'm pretty happy to have, and I think it's also something that's going to be fun to experiment with. As for the cons, of course, there are also going to be some. One major problem for me that is a recurring thing with the DF grinders is that they always have these annoying lights in the on-off button and you can't switch it off. So instead of having a power off button, they just have this on-off button that's always illuminated. Now they have actually managed to fix this by using a regular on-off button, but instead they've created a new problem with this massive RPM wheel that will just be on all the time and shine like a bright diamond when you go out into your kitchen in the nighttime. And if you notice, they also chosen a different font, one that doesn't match the adjustment dial. So once again, some slightly weird decisions from the designers of the grinder. One more slightly annoying thing that happened during my testing period, actually just before I was going to record this video, was that the magnet that sits inside the chute, one of them fell out. It kind of got stuck to the opposite magnet here. And then when I put it back in to this chute part here, I turned it the wrong way around. And then that created a bit of a mess because these are polar magnets, so they kind of repel each other. And it's actually not easy to get it out once you get it in. So this left me really worried for a little bit of time before I managed to get it out again. And then just to be sure it wouldn't happen again, I super glued it, and of course it was one of those situations where you think you can just get away with super gluing without putting gloves on. And yeah, that's just some life advice. Never do that because you will always get super glue on your fingers. So that's another thing with the DF grinders. I'm not sure the quality control is always the best. So overall, I will say that the new DF64V beats the original version in every single way there is. Well, except for price. It's a lot more expensive now. Still, I would say at the current price point, it's hard to look around in the grinder market and say there's anything that can really compete with it in terms of being a great all-rounder, being small, quiet, suitable for single dose. Yeah, I don't really see many options out there. Of course, you have the Time War Sculptor. I did a review of the 64S version recently. In many ways, they are comparable, and they are probably my two favorite all-round 64mm grinders of 2023. This one, compared to the DF83, well, I will say they are two extremely different grinders, even though they are both DFs. The DF83 is just way bigger, way more bulky. It's more noisy. I do run the DF83 with SSP cast burrs now, and I have to say it produces a really delicious coffee. However, with that added price of $350 to $400, it's also a totally different price point. So if you're willing to put up with these small DF Quirks, that kind of lack of design thinking in some aspects, and slightly cheaper feeling wood accents, a little bit of stalling now and then I think it's an easy grinder to recommend.